Good evening and welcome to the Board of Trustees Policy Committee meeting. Please join me for a meditative thought followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, welcome to the Sumter School District Board of Trustees Policy Committee meeting. This meeting is held in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. The news media has been notified and a copy of the agenda has been made available to the public. All persons wishing to attend the virtual meeting may do so via YouTube Sumter School District Board Meetings and Sumter School District's Facebook page. Due to COVID-19 and in compliance with recent public health orders, no members from the public will be able to attend the meeting in person. Mission. The mission of Sumter School District is to equip students to be responsible, successful, and productive citizens in a global society. Vision. Sumter School District develops and cultivates competitive students who embrace diversity, act responsibly, and contribute positively to society. Committee members, Brian L. Austin, yours truly, Chairman of the Policy Committee, Reverend Darrell F. McGaney, Mrs. Cheryl Ray, and Dr. Gloria R. Lee. Our Superintendent, Dr. Penelope E. Martin Knox, Mrs. Amy Hanson, our Administrative Manager. All members of the committee have been privy to the agenda prior to this meeting. If there is no objections, the agenda will stand approved. Any objections? Hearing none, the agenda stands approved. 3.1, the review of policy ACB, educational equity, and sample policy ACA and ACA-R equity. I'm going to turn it over to the administration for updates on this policy.
So, good evening, Chairman Austin, members of the Policy Committee. This evening, we have Dr. Moore, who is joining us to provide us with an update as it pertains to the review of policy ACB, the educational equity policy. Dr. Moore.
Good evening, everyone. I'll quickly share my screen. I do have a few updates for you as it relates to the equity policy. We did have an opportunity to meet as a equity team to review the written policy, and we had a few edits, but or some suggestions that we talked about. But for the most part, the team was extremely excited about the work that has been done related to this policy, and we quickly focused a lot of our conversations from the logistics and the verbiage of the policy into some of the action items. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that we've done since the last time I've updated you. Of course, just as a reminder, here are the members of our team. It's bittersweet that we're losing Dr. Aisha Hunter, but we will be looking at someone that will replace and give us another, hopefully another principal that will give us that lens as we continue to work through some of the equity issues. But this is just a screen that shows you a list of all of our members. What we have done since the last time we have updated you, we have met with two companies. We talked about possibly bringing in a third-party company that can assist us with the work of looking at equity in our school district. Quite a few other districts in South Carolina have worked with these two companies, but the two companies we did meet with were Hanover Research Group, and they've done a lot of work with Richmond 2 and some of the other surrounding districts here in South Carolina. And we also looked at the Insight Advanced Group. So we allowed those two companies to present to us what they have done with equity with districts in South Carolina, and they've shared a lot of their work with us. Just a quick summary of those meetings. Both of these companies have worked with South Carolina school districts. As I stated earlier, they both provide an equity audit process. And this equity audit will basically give us some hard data to let us know where we are as far as it stands with equity that we could use to build an equity plan. And both companies provide support to school districts in the audit analysis. So not only creating the audit tool, they can help us with analyzing those data points and developing an equity plan, which is where we ultimately want to go to support the board policy. They both have flexible pricing because that was something that we wanted to look at as well. So it's not one flat rate. We can actually work with them at our readiness level and at our budget level to make sure that they meet the needs of our district. One company does provide more support as far as building staff capacity and providing professional development. And that's something that we do want to talk about with the team a little bit more to see what the needs are with our staff as far as training them and building their capacity in equity practices. So we did take some time to do that. What our next steps are, we have a timeline, and June was pretty quiet for us. That's when a lot of administrators were closing school and a lot of things. So by the end of this month, we plan to review the proposals from the companies and finalize the company that we want to recommend that we use to create the Sumter School District Equity Policy. We also, in lieu of all of this, the work of the AIR research firm, they have done a lot of work with us in some of our grants here in Sumter County or Sumter School District, and we want to really talk to them a little bit more. We started conversations with them to see if some of the work that they are already doing can complement the work that we want to do with equity. So we want to have some more conversations with AIR before making our final decision. But August to September, which is that first quarter of the next school, the upcoming school year, we want to make sure that the equity audit is fully devised, we've vetted it, and we are administering it, hopefully in the first quarter of the school year. This will be when our students and our staff are coming in, and it gives us that fresh data point that we can build upon. September through December, we want to spend time analyzing those audit results, reporting those results to all of the stakeholders that participated, and the audit would involve us surveying our parents, our staff, and our students on equity issues. And we want to report those things back to our school leaders and to our community. And then the team will dig into devising the nuts and bolts of the equity plan. And hopefully we'll have the support of that third-party organization to make sure that what we're doing is according to the best practices in equity. So that's just where we plan to go. We'll probably have some more updates as we go along to let you know how we're going. But we're still excited about the work. It is a lot to accomplish, but we're excited that it's going to yield some positive results for our school district. Any questions? And I'll entertain any questions from anyone.
All right, you mentioned that the audit would involve surveys. Could you give us an idea of what else they do in an equity audit?
So some of the other things that they will do is more of a desk audit where they would look at our fiscal practices to see how we normally spend money and see how that impacts certain schools, certain parts of the community. They will also pull in our hiring practices to see how we're hiring for teachers. Is it comparable to match the demographics of schools, and look at some of those patterns that we may not know exist, but we may need to be more intentional about adjusting as we work to look at equity. So it's just not the survey. There's some other things about how our district practices may be equitable or not equitable that we may not be aware of. And so they'll start looking at just the hard facts and then meet with us to say, this is what we found, this is what seems to be trending, and this is what we recommend. And then it'll be up to us to go from there to devise our plan and to have those internal dialogues as we see fit to start making some changes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for that update, and I look forward to hearing about the proposal and the work moving forward. So thank you again, and thank you to the team as well that's working on this work for Sumter School District.
Absolutely, thank you guys.
I would comment, you know, you really don't realize a lot of things. I remember years and years ago, we did some analysis in classrooms, and sometimes the teachers will call on one side of the room more than others, or, you know, of course, the gender thing, and it's just, it is very interesting to analyze all of that, because you're doing things that you don't realize. So I'm anxious to hear the results. That'll be good. I also had a question now, this is the equity policy that's already in our manual that's here. Okay, and we've got two examples, so is this is the one that we're working on, is there gonna be revision on this too?
I think they're using this as the basis of the policy, and the committee is working on expanding it to make sure it's all inclusive of equity work across the district.
Okay, so, and this was adopted, it said in March.
That was the equity policy that came from SCAD.
All of this came, and then you've got examples from other districts.
Correct.
Okay. This is a little bit wordy, I think.
The current policy is wordy.
Yeah,
I think it's wordy and it's vague as well.
yes, because, because after you get so tied up in it, that you forget what you're supposed to be addressing in it. So I just wondered, were we gonna work on streamlining that somewhat? To still include everything that we wanna include, but just, where it's a little easier to read and.
And the policy that the team is developing should be specific to Sumter School District, and this is just a blanket, equity policy.
Okay, I just wasn't sure where that came from.
One follow-up question to that, at, I guess some point, this may be for Doc, not Mark, they'll present the finale or whatever to the board for board review or see board that and kind of amendment or whatever and recommendation. Okay, thank you.
Hearing none, we're going down to 3.2, review of policy KLGA, school resource officers. Administration on that as well.
Sure. And so, good evening, Mr. Myers and Mr. Washington. Mr. Calvin Williams, yeah, that one. I can't see him.
He's waving to you now.
I can't see him, he's not on there. Amy, can you, thank you. It was on speaker view, so I can't see him.
Okay.
Oh, there he is. Hi, Mr. Williams. So, we have Mr. Williams and Mr. Myers who've been working on, policy KLGA. And again, as, Ms. Ray just mentioned a few moments ago, we are making sure that what we do is, interrelated and connected. We cannot write policies in isolation. So Mr. Myers and Mr. Williams, have also attended a conference most recently, in terms of the school resource officers, as we've talked about previously. But, I'm going to yield at this time to Mr. Myers and Mr. Williams, to present the information as it pertains to, policy KLGA school resource officers.
All right, well, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Martin Knox. We have been working with the policy itself, and we've been, since the last time we met, a couple of things have occurred that have been of benefit to the entire process. Mr. Williams and I did attend the State School Resource Officers Conference. That in itself was very beneficial, being in a room with nothing but officers and with weapons and everything else. That's one of the safest places, most secure place we've been in a while. So we are just delighted to have had that opportunity, and a lot of things that we've uncovered with persons from around the state, with different things that they're doing. We're definitely in line, and we just want to make sure that our policy matches some of the things that we need to do as far as state laws that are changing that will affect some of the things that we're doing with discipline and how they're to manage themselves in the building. We also received an additional piece of that was that we now have our memorandums of understanding from both agencies, one from the sheriff's department and one from the city. And that in itself is something we want to make sure that we can blend and make sure that the language and all of what's there is working for the goals that we have. With our team, we haven't met since we've returned from the conference. However, Mr. Williams and I have been putting together a lot of the information so that we can share that with the team and then we can take it and run with it. I'm going to yield at this point to give Mr. Williams an opportunity to share some of the things that we've done as far as the definitions of a resource officer and so forth. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. And at this time, I'm going to share my, excuse me, I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen now?
Not yet.
We can see it now.
You can see it now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is policy KLGA. And our team did last meet on, you can see here, May the 19th. And what we basically did was broke the policy down line by line, and these were the recommendations. And here what I did was just put it in the current policy so you guys can see how it would align. One of the biggest things we're looking at is the language, and we wanted to move, our focus was to kind of get away from the language of law enforcement per se, being the SRO main duty, and we wanted them to focus more on, in addition to the law enforcement activities, focus more on prevention, diversion, and social supports. And we also extended the role beyond just the staff and the students to add the community to the process as well. And in the definitions that Mr. Myers mentioned earlier, the previous policy didn't speak specifically to actual SRO training. And from our understanding at the conference, there is an actual SRO training that goes beyond the regular law enforcement training that we receive. And the previous policy as it stands kind of speaks to law enforcement training. And also, and the definition that we pulled actually come from the state law, as it's written in the state law. The piece with the advisor, for them to serve as law enforcement advisor and teachers for the school district, was one thing we pulled out. Some of the language and jurisdiction in the current policy is stating that with safety risk or the conduct is the third or sequential act which raises the level to a criminality in that school year. Based on how our code of conduct is written in the administrative rule, a third act isn't automatically a criminal event. And one of the things Mr. Myers and I talk about, and we have to get with that committee as well, is the State Department, some of the behavior codes in our Category 3 section, the State Department of Education, they define some, they allow us the autonomy to define some ourselves. But a lot of those that we have in the Category 3 section, they're now using state law to define some of those codes. So just making sure that when we say things like 3 consecutive and criminal, that it actually match up with how our policy is currently written. And as I stated earlier, the stuff that's in red and underlined are the changes that we're recommending or will be recommending at this time. Any questions?
Yes, Mr. Williams, I see you have some verbiage that's highlighted in green. Is that the current verbiage? What's in green?
That's my learning curve
Okay.
with Google. I missed and clicked the editing, one of the settings, and it actually changed the color. But let me see. No, what happened here is in the actual policy, there were a couple of bullets in the policy that had the sentences separated.
Do you have, are you all working on in the policy verbiage as to when a school resource officer is needed in the classroom? For example, a lot of times teachers have issues with discipline, and the school resource officers is the first resort when it should not be the first resort. The first resort should be the teacher in the classroom, where they work or make every attempt to resolve the issue, exhaust all their remedies before they revert to a school resource officer. Instead of the school resource officer, the minute a child act up, they want to call a school resource officer. Like the school resource officer is the discipline when they're really not the disciplinarian. So make sure as we're doing this policy, we have clear and concise verbiage or language that reads when we can utilize a school resource officer. I understand they're at the school for safety. However, make sure that we have, like I said, the verbiage for when they can be called. Thank you.
And if I could just call your attention, that language is already in the policy. Under jurisdiction, school administrators and staff shall have the primary responsibility for maintaining proper order in the school and for disciplining the students for violation of board policies and school rules. And Mr. Myers can attest, and Mr. Myers and Dr. Martin and I were having that conversation the whole time, I think. The school resource officers in the SRO training were told that that's no longer their function. So that's becoming a common thing across the state. Mr. Myers, Dr. Martin, want to add anything else?
Yes, I was going to inject, Mr. McGaney, you're absolutely right. School resource officers are not disciplinarians, and we're going to make sure that when we address that, we've got to address that with our administrators so that the training can be there for teachers as well. I know it's so easy to think that whenever something happens in a classroom, that I have to get a law enforcement agent to come to my room. The first order of business is for the administrator to get there and decide what happens next. Law enforcement agents or SROs are to deal with criminal matters and not just mere discipline kinds of things. And the administrator will be the ones to ignite that engagement with that SRO. So the language is in the policy. The language will be in the MOU as well, so that we're covering all corners of it and everybody will understand how we're to move forward.
I'm glad to hear you say that, Mr. Myers, as my focus were so much, and I know the policy is about school resource officers.
Yes, sir.
But the school resource officer, they are called to serve and protect. That's their job, and they're gonna do that. But I think I heard you say that the staff and administrators, to me, are the one that needs to understand this policy. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
In that same section, I see where it said the administrator or other school officials may refer level 2 misconduct to the school resource officer. What about the level 1? Is that just, are we just saying all of that's criminal, or is that the understanding there? Why just level 2?
Well, in our policy, level 2 speaks to health and safety issues. So, if there's a situation, because a fight is a level 2 situation, so depending on the nature of the fight or harm that may have taken place, it just gives, because level 2 is defined as health and safety issues, law enforcement may be involved.
And what about level one?
Level one are your low-level classroom disruption, things of that nature. Those are the things that, they were moving law enforcement out of those areas.
Well, let me
Those are
know.
more the teacher administrative type deals. It's
Okay,
defined as classroom disruptions and school disruptions.
so we only have level one and two,
Level three are criminal activities.
so everything in level three is criminal?
By definition of the state, for level three activities should be criminal, but all of the things that we have be criminal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's why I'm wondering if you need to put level two and three could be referred to because you might not refer all of that to the school resource officer, is that what you're saying? I just wondered why you just put level two.
Our level two offenses may escalate to a point where we may need to engage SROs. And with level three, we have to determine, that administrator must determine at that point whether he must engage that SRO or not. It all depends on the actions that are there and all of the different things that are taking place at the time. So
So
that level two offenses could rise to a point where we need to engage that SRO.
And what you're saying though is level three could also be to that level.
Yes.
So, again, would you not wanna put level two or three, level three misconduct to involve a resource officer? I understand that most things in level three would be, of a criminal nature perhaps, but not all of them would necessarily use the resource officer.
Well, that is correct, and I think just taking that under consideration, we'll definitely make sure that we share that with the committee, and we'll talk about that as well.
And Ms. Sam, if I may add, in the code of conduct, law enforcement is identified as one of the steps for the level three situations, whereas level two is not. So this just gives the administrators a little more discretion based on the nature of the situation.
So I think the operative word, and if you would take this back to the committee for me, to Ms. Ray's point, I think the operative word would be may. It may include, not it should, it will, but it may include. So when we talk about those situations that are in level twos, if an SRO or school resource officer has to intervene, he or she can. And again, it's still with the collaboration with the school-based administrators. But take that language back to the committee and let's massage that to see how we could address that based on what Ms. Ray just spoke of. I don't want us to create a situation where we're locked in one way or the other. Because again, to most of the points that we're talking about, when we're looking at SROs, what I would like to continue to see is that our SROs, and many of them do a really good job of doing this, is formulating relationships with our children, to serve as models, to make sure they're educated, not just in the schoolhouse, but how we also conduct ourselves out in public. So, there is a divide between criminal law and school law, and so it is a continued partnership, but I think that looking at the operative word of may will help in those situations. Is it in alignment with what you're thinking?
Yeah, I just think that you might wanna say it that way for both levels. Just so that I know it's stated for most things, but. Yes, I understand what it is, I didn't think that one.
You indicated that the teachers will be taking a training. How often will they be taking the training, or have they already begun the training before the school year started?
Did you hear the question?
I couldn't hear the question.
The question was, you mentioned about a training. Has that training already taken place, or when and how often will that training take place
For the teachers?
for the teachers?
Well, that's information that we're going to share with the administrators, and we've got a number of modules that we use in order to get everyone on board. So that's forthcoming. And since there have been some changes with with the law. We want to make sure we have all of that in there when we provide that, so everybody will get it at the same time. So it's forthcoming.
So once we do get that into law, will this be an annual thing every year that you refresher, with this training, to make sure that they are up to date on the changes that may occur or anything that may change within the laws?
That is correct, yes.
Yes, for the district, follow up, and I think this may be for Dr. Martin Knox or, Mr. Myers. I commend law enforcement and the job they do. We need law enforcement in our schools, especially in this day and age, when we talk about safe schools. My question is, the legislators, there was an all-out push at some point, and I'm sure there still is, of trying to get, school resource officers in every school. Can you tell us where we are in our district in regards to law enforcement officers and manpower? I know funding may be an issue, I haven't heard it.
So funding is an issue, and that's a good question. In our secondary schools, we have SROs in our secondary schools, and because of the partnership we have with the Sheriff's Department and the Police Department, we also provide supports and services to our elementary schools when needed. So we have SROs at the secondary level who will respond to the elementary schools when needed. Last year and the year before last, we received additional funding so that we can provide those schools that were without an SRO to have one in the building full time, as opposed to being able to split them. So we identified our secondary schools as having the biggest need, but it is a funding thing, and so we continue to wait for additional funding and supports so that we can even push into our elementary schools. Again, not for criminal activity, but again, to formulate those relationships with children, to put drug awareness into place for our children. But we're continuing to look at that, and there are some funding sources as well that are out there. Mr. Myers and Mr. Williams, or as I changed your name so eloquently earlier, Mr. Washington. But I actually learned at my first board meeting, and don't ask me why that stuck. But anyway, I know who you are, Mr. Williams. When you all went to the conference, was there any conversation about the funding and where we are from the trainings that you attended?
Did have one conversation in reference to retirees coming back. And we had Alan Wilson there speaking on that, looking into that. And they actually changed the rules in reference to law enforcement retirees coming back and being able to work. But actual funding sources for them to come to school, they didn't have anything specific on that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, one last follow-up with that, while we're in the process of, working on our policies. I know we were very good in the past, working with law enforcement as far as practice drills and everything. As far as our students, and I think it would be very beneficial for us because of what has happened in the past all over the world and we may need to include in our policies, mock practice drills. We do tornado drills. I'm not saying we may be doing it, I'm not sure, but I think it would behoove us to get in the habit of practicing mock drills throughout our schools moving forward. In the event, you just don't know. So I think we need to make sure our policy is reflective of that, if it's not.
And so that's a good point. We actually it's not just in our schools, it's in our offices as well. We just had a fire drill here in the district office the other day, because we have to make sure that our staff and our adults are also safe. So we had one here the other day. Mr. Williams Washington, would you be so kind as to talk about the legislation with the proviso as it pertains to the shift in the manner in which we do drills and there it is, good job. So we do have the drills in place, and schools are required to have safety plans without going in too much detail. Mr. Williams, would you be so kind as to talk about the requirements and how we do them, weather-related and fire and bus and all those other drills we perform in practice?
Well, as as you can see, there's, the state has required us to come up with a policy more specific with drills. And just to kind of answer your question, we actually have a list of drills that they'll do, that we're proposing. Just, tell them which drills to do, how frequent, which drills will take place each month. And we're adding that to the drill process to make sure it's more consistent, non-traditional instructional time, so on and so forth. And this will go out upon approval to everybody. Each school has a representative to serve on the overall district emergency management team. So we're drilling it down, and there's a new checklist that's coming down where the State Department will be managing, and we'll get you more details on that in the future. But we are honing in on drills, especially with the time we've been out of school thus far.
Because it's mock drills, will there be any collaboration with, say, EMS, law enforcement, since it's a mock, maybe just to go through the entire scenario with other agencies partnering? Because that's what's gonna happen in the event it's the real thing in regards to,
And so to answer your question, yes, the year before last, or actually last year, because we're not completely in the year, we actually did presentations to our staff regarding the response to an emergency, and our local agencies did that professional development for us. So we do continue to partner with them. We also started doing safety walks. We have a emergency safety team. We started that last year, but of course, with the pandemic, it kind of put a halt to those things that we were doing. And so we, as a team, would go into schools and look at practices, look at the drills, the safety plan to make sure that the drills were being conducted as required, and giving feedback and looking at our own practices within the district, just to make sure that, one, we have a plan, and two, that the plan is not just a plan to have on the shelf, that it is to be executed at any given time. And again, we're still continuing to refine the work that we do, again, especially in our district offices, food services, and all those other areas. Mr. Myers or Mr. Williams, would you like to, and Ms. Galloway, are you still on here because you were part of those safety walks as well? Does anybody want to add anything that I may have omitted?
Yes, annually we met with, last year we met with law enforcement, with a representative from each school to review and outline emergency plans. Mr. Myers and I, along with Eric Hayes, were in conversations about expanding that process to bring on EMS, fire department, in addition to law enforcement and other stakeholders. And if you see in April, and this is just projective stuff, we'll get final approval where we talk about the active shooting tabletop, where we kind of bring all the staff together, not necessarily the kids, but the staff, so everybody understand what's going on. So we're definitely in the planning stage, and we're hoping to have a great product when we're done. Mr. Myers?
I agree with all of Mr. Williams just shared, and we just want to make sure that we're staying on top of it and everybody else is abreast, because you never know when you're going to need it. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it in place. So we're going to continue to work with the various things that we have, the different types of drills, and we want to ensure that everybody in the school building is aware, even down to our building service staff, food service staff, anyone who's in that building is going to be aware of the different processes that are necessary to keep everyone in that building safe.
thank you.
And I'd like to add another piece as well. We, about a month ago, as an executive leadership team, we all became CPR certified. Our very own Michelle Devine gave us training. So we all had to test babies and adults and the masks, and we went through the entire routine just to make sure we knew how to administer CPR in the event of someone's illness or an emergency. So, we're all CPR certified, and again, it's something that we needed to have under our belts.
You mentioned that, how about the AEDs? Who certified those?
So that was also a part of the CPR training. So the defibrillators, Mr. Myers, you wanna talk about the defibrillators and where they are? And so to your point, good question, Ms. Ray, that was a part of the CPR training and how to use a defibrillator, whether it's on an adult, whether it's on a baby, and, you know, how to clear the area. I mean, so she did an excellent job with giving us that training. There's no sense that we have defibrillators around, but who knows how to use them? There's no sense in having them if you don't know how to use them. But Mr. Myers, you wanna talk about those?
Yes, ma'am. All of our schools are equipped with defibrillators. All of our schools have at a minimum at least two. We try to make sure that there's one in the guidance area, and one in a conspicuous area. Our high schools with athletics have more because there must be an AED or defibrillator with that team as they are in practice field, as they are away at games, and they're always accessible. And our goal is to make sure we can have them in all of the very conspicuous places. The training that we have, there is a training and there is servicing of those units once a year to ensure that the pads are still working accurately and the system is up to date. So we were just looking the other day at making sure that we have more than just one at our district office location, and they're mounted where anyone who comes into the building can see them, and there are specific instructions that go along with each one. So we'll continue to provide the training that's necessary for everyone in making sure that they know how to use them, and we're going to make sure that they're always available and operational.
All right, I'm going to something else now. And I don't know if this is related to the memorandum of understanding or what it would be. I know that the resource officer is a law enforcement officer and he's also working at a school. What is who is the supervisor, or how do principals understand their role with the police or the sheriff's department? Is that going to be clarified?
Yes, it will. There is a supervisor who checks on the SROs at all of our sites. The principal and that SRO will meet and discuss the role of the SRO, and that's why we try to make sure our principals are up to date on all of the different changes. And as we spoke earlier, that's the type of training we will take our principals through so that everybody is working from the same format, and one isn't getting more of this and less of the other. But yes, there is a supervisor who makes contact with myself, Mr. Williams, the principals, and will actively be in the schools to observe the different things that are going on, and they will have their trainings as well with them.
And to add to that as well, I usually maintain contact with the sheriff and the chief, just to make sure that we're operating again in a cohesive manner.
Dr. Rush, you said that everyone is being trained in CPR. Did that include the teachers?
It did not, it was just the executive team, because at the schoolhouse, they usually have someone, usually a coach or someone else who's been certified. In the district office and in the annex, we didn't have anybody. So that was important for us to make sure we had individuals in both places who were CPR. And as we wanted to school, we could also lend a hand, should a crisis occur. But it was necessary for us to do it. And I think that, there were two reasons for the push. I think there was an incident that happened at one of our games, and I began to think to say, what if I were there? Would I have been a help or a hindrance? And so it was necessary for us. And many of the team had training. It had expired, or because we are not in the school anymore, we didn't recertify. So we had to start from scratch again. So it's mainly the executive leaders in both the annex and the district office. But we are looking to see if we can expand a little more. But in the schools, coaches are usually the ones who are certified and trained.
So if a coach is not there, when's it like that?
They're usually a nurse and whomever's in that safety plan. So usually it's listed in the safety plan who's the next person who's responsible for the CPR piece.
So each school will have someone there that's
They do.
okay.
Coach, yeah, usually coach,
Okay.
the coach, the nurses, and then there are other backup individuals.
Okay, thank you.
The MERT team, the medical response team,
Mr. Myers and Mr. Williams, I do have a question regarding the training, and the training that you attended as well. Was there any conversation around SROs and, students that have mental health issues or social emotional needs or students with disabilities?
Well, there was, and there was a session that they attended as well as sessions that they attend on social emotional issues, because they have to maintain their level of understanding and receptivity to that type of demeanor. But yes, there is training that they have. There isn't any current training that we have except for the different things we do for our staff, and that's something we could take a look at to ensure that we're including them in that as well.
And they did have a training specific to 504s and IEPs, and just some of the consensus across the district that we would plan to look into is law enforcement accessibility to students record with disabilities, and how do they garner more information about a student with disability. So looking at expanding the collaboration with the special service population as well as and law enforcement.
Any more questions from the committee? Thank you, gentlemen, so much for the work that you're doing, and please tell the rest of the committee as well. Thank you so much for that work as well, and I look forward to this policy being updated and the work and the implementation of it as well.
Thank you.
We're now down to 3.3, review of policy ADA, school district goals and objectives.
So at this time, I'd like to yield to Ms. Shelley Galloway, who's been working diligently with our teams across the district. Ms. Galloway.
All right, good evening, Chairman Alston, policy committee members, and Superintendent Dr. Martin Knox. I am really excited about the opportunity to present an update to this policy, and the purpose of this policy is to establish the board's vision and basic structure for developing a district strategic plan and school renewal plans with any updates. And just a little background on the process of the development of the new mission and vision. A lot of work actually went into the development of the new mission and vision. This has been a 2-year process, and we conducted an extensive activity with our Teacher Advisory Council, which consists of representation from every single school. First of all, we launched it with a vision activity, and then the development of the mission. From there, we also conducted that same activity with our administrators, and then launched a survey to all employees and our community members at large. And so when we were in the process of developing, ideas for the new vision and mission, we asked ourselves, what evidence can you think of that we are meeting our current vision and mission? What kind of school district do we hope to be? What do you think should be reflected in our vision and mission statements? What do we need to do differently to achieve this vision and mission? And how are we different from other school districts? And so when we put together all of those answers, and this really took quite a long time to, extensive review, the recommendations that came out of these two groups and also the survey data is the following. So as you can see, the current vision statement is Sumter School District will educate all students to embrace diversity, act responsibly, and contribute positively in a competitive global society. The recommendation for our new vision statement is Sumter School District educates, empowers, and enriches the lives of every student in every school, every day. And then as far as the new mission statement,
I think it's an okay thorn, but I just want you to know that I appreciate the work that you in making sure that we maintain communication with our stakeholders inside of the district and in our community, because I believe that with the vision and mission statement, all must know it, recognize it, and be a part of it in order to embrace it and implement. So just thank you for your diligence in this project.
thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Galloway, as well, and echo the sentiments of Dr. Martin Knox. It's good I asked that question specifically about the number of surveys. ensure that we did have, community buy-in, and that the community owns a part of this mission statement and the vision for our district. So thank you for the hard work as well.
You're welcome, thank you.
Down to item 3.4, review of policy ADD face cover.
So this is a work in progress. We have always maintained the safety of our students and our staff are key to our community and vital to the safety of our community as well. And so the frame was a temporary policy that was put in place as a result of the pandemic. And so as we know that many of the guidelines that have been implemented thus far have been relaxed. What I will say is that I received feedback from members of the community, and it's almost split down the middle. There are some who want us to mandate the face masks, and there are some who are saying we don't need to mandate the face masks. And so I think at this point, with the recommendation that just came out from the American Academy of Pediatrics, there is a recommendation that children under the age of 12 years old should wear a mask, or it's recommended that children be required to wear a mask to schools. I believe that this should be an option for our parents. And so when you look at the language, it says will or may. I believe that students may wear their face coverings, because again, it is the option of the parent to send their children to school, ensuring that they are safe when they're reporting to school. I also believe that we need to continue to make sure that as students wake in the morning, if they're not feeling well, just to make sure that they are still adhering to those criteria that exist in terms of contracting COVID, or if we look at the new variant that has been identified, the Delta variant, that we take that into consideration as well. But I do believe that our language for face covering should say that parents may send their children to school with masks on. I do believe it's the discretion of our parents and for our staff. So this should be for staff and students. What I also want to make sure is that we, I guess, take apart the difference between a face mask and a face covering, because a face covering has a different connotation than a face mask. Face coverings are typically for religious purposes, and so they should not be interfered with when children are coming to school. But face masks, again, if staff and students wish to wear face masks to school, they should be able to do so. And so that is just my recommendation in terms of moving forward with the face masks.
You confuse me with face covering and face mask.
Yes, ma'am.
But we're saying face covering here, so what are we?
So this is the model policy from SCASBA, and they use the language face covering, and that's why I threw it in there, because I think there's a difference between a face covering, usually for religious purposes, a burqa or another item that's going across the face is a face covering. What we have on our face masks. So what I'm asking is that we look at this and we classify this as face masks and not face covering, and giving parents the option of sending their children to school.
That would be changed.
Yes, ma'am, that's just my recommendation. And so, daily and throughout the day, the guidelines are shifting, and we continue to make sure we adjust so that we're in compliance, but also making sure our children are safe when they come to school. I don't know if many realize, but now, whereas the mandate was that students had to wear face masks on the buses, that is no longer a requirement. Bless you. But we continue to make sure that our students are safe. So again, this saying face coverings, I think it has a different connotation, and maybe you all may think differently. I think it needs to be separated, because I don't want to violate anybody in terms of their religion.
Just to respond to you said that you received responses that were both for and against face masks. I think it's important for our community to know that the budget proviso, we cannot enforce mask wearing in schools or on the school buses. But it is an option in some school districts to send your child
Myers, you wanna touch on, the sanitization and the hand sanitizer in the buildings and, those other factors that we are continuing to employ, as a result of the pandemic, please?
Yes, ma'am. We will continue to provide our building services staff with the appropriate cleaning supplies and utensils. We'll make sure that our schools still have all of the sanitization or the hand sanitizers that are necessary, all of the wipes that they need. So we're not going to change that. We're going to make sure that all of that remains in place. We just want to ensure that we're doing all we can to keep it in place. And we do have a sufficient supply of the items that we just mentioned, and we will continue to stay ahead of that so that we're not running short. Our building services staff will continue to pick up their pace in making sure that they're cleaning effectively with the deep cleaning and continuing to make sure they have the supplies, and they'll let us know as they're running short. So we're going to stay on top of that, and all of what we mentioned are things that will be in place.
I know school will be coming up soon. We talked about face covering and face masks. So, what about the staff? I know you said students, but I don't know much about the staff. Will it be voluntarily as well for them? Okay.
It'll be optional.
Awesome, okay.
And we're gonna make this, go back to that point, that's part of the budget provider, we can't enforce the face wearing, they can't use something to this volunteer. Thank you, Dr. Martin. Thank you, Mr. Myers, as well, for your comments.
Yes, sir.
Moving on to 3.5, temporary administrative rules for review, EB-R, maintaining healthy environments, EEA-R, student transportation, IHA-R, and IHA-E, opt-out of on-site instruction, JE-R, student attendance, KI-R, and KI-E visitors. And these are SCASPA recommendations to review. Everyone had a chance to hear it first.
A lot of those are just good practices, no matter what, whether it's a pandemic or not. Yeah, because I think we prevented a lot of other illnesses by just being more aware. I did have a question that, and it said something about, I don't know about, is this the one that has the, about the, if somebody does contract something, is this where the isolation of quarantine? What are we doing for students when that happens and teachers? Because will our virtual option be able to take care of that, or what are really, what will they do since we're not doing the virtual and in person?
So we're still, yes ma'am, I'm sorry. So we're still working with Adventum to make sure that we're able to do that because we actually have cases going on right now as we speak.
Right.
And so we're still following the guidelines and the protocol in terms of isolation, but we will still continue to provide our students with work. And so while we have another meeting coming up, and so that is a conversation on the table, so that while those students are out for that temporary period of time, or if they become ill, we can, provide them with their virtual option. So there is no cutoff, for that.
So that we
two, remote instruction, and EDC-R3, virtual board meetings. And during the implementation of these policies, have you encountered any issues with the implementation or any issues from the staff concerning any of these policies?
These policies were developed and read in all districts and given as emergency policies related to instruction staff before meetings in the event of any future launch of an emergency.
I think, just to reiterate a point that was made, during last school year, I think that with policies like this in place, it allowed our district to be at the forefront, and, not encounter a lot of the issues that other districts encountered, when it came to going from closing buildings and engaging in remote learning, because we were able to do it almost overnight, almost in this week. So I think this is policies that will be beneficial in the event that we have to deal with another pandemic for a long time.
And you're absolutely right, these policies are great, and we allow Dr. Knox, kudos to her for being able to do her job and to allow the staff to keep their jobs and to maintain a salary for them without having anybody off. So I really feel that, when I read all these, that it was a good standing, policy for Sumter, and you kept Sumter strong by doing that. And you did.
And if I may, we're talking about the pandemic, this is also, I think, back to Ms. Gray's point in terms of good practice, if it's weather related. If we have to close for weather purposes, these are good practices to have readily available for individuals for us to immediately refer to, without disrupting the learning of our children. So again, I think these are just good practices to have in our bank and to have there if and unless we need them, for a particular situation, be it the flu, be it whatever it may be, and weather related.
All right, we're down to 3.7, discussion of policy related to the Open Carry with Training Act. Open Carry with Training Act. And this discussion was placed on the agenda, as we were made aware that the governor has signed legislation that you can openly carry, your firearm with training. Although the legislation speaks to firearms not being allowed on school property when there are students present, the language is very vague as far as after hours when students are not technically present, as far as the normal operation of the school day. And I immediately thought about our athletic facilities, like our football stadiums and things of that sort.
I wanna believe that may be something law enforcement may be against, I say that, but I wanna, Mark Dawson, have you had any conversations with law enforcement in regards to,
I have not. Just looking at our practices and looking at our policies, and I think the only concern I have is, because we have practices and laws on our side for school-related events and activities, my concern is on those non-related school events and activities where individuals use our facilities, and after hours. I think that open weapons on our facilities at any time, because there's always the possibility of children being present. Whether it's, again, a carnival affair, a dance recital, whatever it may be, I just think we need to exercise caution.
when there's an event, of those non-related school events or whatever, is law enforcement notified of the event that's gonna be taking place?
That's usually a part of the school facilities, piece. Mr. Myers, you wanna speak to that, because you do the most of the
yes, whenever there's a school activity, and most of our high schools have most of the different activities going on, there's law enforcement that's been contacted and present. And with our other schools as well, it's gonna be a big crowd. We try to make sure that law enforcement is aware of the different things that are going on. So, we contact them at different times, so they're there.
Thank you. I'm not trying to play devil's advocate, but now we just talked about school resource officers and when they can come in to do their job. And I don't want us to conflict or contradict what we have in place. For example, if we talking about open carry and individuals have open carry, what warrant, and we talking about teachers and administrators exhausting all of the remedies with the student and the child or whatever the case may be. And if I have a weapon on me, and or if a school resource officer is in the building and an incident warrants me protecting myself versus going to get the school resource officer because the policy say this is when he comes in, then I take matters into my own hands. I don't want to put myself in a position to have to explain why I didn't get a school resource officer, but take matters in my own hands. I think that's going to be a gray area that I would highly recommend we have some conversation with the chief, sheriff, and see what their thoughts are on that before we really talk about making a decision, because we don't want to contradict. Well, it says open carry,
But
correct?
they can't carry them during this, you can't openly carry it on the school grounds while there's students present, so a teacher will be able to carry it during the school day.
I know we can't carry,
But if someone were to,
right, that's what I'm talking about. I know we can't carry.
That's part of the orientation.
Conceal, but this is supposed to be open here. I was just gonna say, when you were talking about, really should never be on school property because there's always students present. So the athletic event after hours or anything that they have, I think you get into a problem with that. And then with outside people, maybe that should be part of the agreement, that that's suspended during that time. If you're gonna use our facilities, just like we're a no smoking area, or no open carry, that at any time, because that gets into a lot.
And I say that because I can go across not just South Carolina and read articles where a child was in possession of a gun in school. You see what I'm saying? So I know they can't bring it, but who's to say they won't bring it? You follow what I'm saying?
Mr. Myers, we had that conversation about, putting this language in the facilities, use form, correct?
That is correct, and we're working on that, yes, ma'am.
That's what I was asking, is to be a part of the training, so that they know and sign a contract or something to verify that they have read that they cannot bring a weapon in. So that would hopefully be a part of the training that we will be having.
And so, I agree with that, and so, when we are using, our facilities for other events, that's what I was referring to earlier. When there are, activities that are taking place at the schoolhouse or on the school grounds, we still need to make sure that we are covered as a district, whether it's, on a Saturday, a Friday, or a Sunday, that we're covered, because there is going to be a child or children on that school property for whatever reason. We have to continue to safeguard our children. But I think I hear two things with you, Reverend McGee. I hear a student in possession and or an adult in
Correct.
possession.
Correct.
And so we would still handle those the same way as we had. That would go to, Ms. Ray's comment earlier about, the level 3. It would rise to a level 3 in the SRO because it's criminal at that point. And so he or she would be able to respond to that because it is a crime being committed with that weapon on property. So the narrative shifts quickly.
and I have a question, this is for Mr. Myers. Do we currently have signage on our school property saying no weapons? Did you hear the question?
No, I didn't.
Do we currently have signage posted on our school district property saying no weapons or no concealed weapons, no open carried weapons, no weapons that?
There, if I'm not mistaken, there may be at a few facilities, I'm gonna check that to ensure that we have that posted in all conspicuous areas.
And when you're doing that checking, can you ensure that like our football stadiums, our baseball fields, that the signage is there as well, any school district property there is signage?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
And so there is a part of this, and I think it also goes back to Reverend McGinney's point, earlier. If there is an event, the superintendent can give authorization for an individual to carry a weapon on property. But if it's law enforcement and they're on duty, they're on duty. But outside, the superintendent within the law policy can give authorization for someone to carry.
More questions or comments? Hearing none, we're down. Thank you, Mr. Myers, as well.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Knox. We're now down to item 4, steps moving forward, policies for further discussion by the policy committee. The policy committee, and correct me if I'm wrong, we will continue to review the policy on educational equity, school resource officers, and have more discussion on the open carry, as far as firearms and weapons on school districts.
I would highly recommend that the superintendent might have some conversation with the chief and sheriff, just give your thoughts on that. See where,
I don't mind.
okay, thank you so much.
So we're good with those policies, for further discussion, okay? Down to 4.2, recommendations to the Board of Trustees. And those recommendations would be, policy ADA, school district goals and objectives for first reading. Policy ADD, face coverings, that we're going to face masks, with the amendments. Recommend that to the full board for consideration to remain in place, as well as our temporary administrative rules for review, EB-R, maintaining healthy environment, EEA-R, student transportation, IHA-R, and IHA-E, opt-out of on-site instruction, JE-R, student attendance, KI-R, and KI-E visitors, to keep those temporary administrative rules in place, as well as our long-term emergency administrative rules, EBC-R1, remote work, EBC-R2, remote instruction, and EBC-R3, virtual board meetings, will be recommended to remain in place and to adopt. Okay, we're now down to item 5, consent agenda. If there is no objection to the minutes that you've been privy to, they will stand approved. Any objections to those minutes? Hearing none. We're now down to item 6, the closing of the meeting. Thank you to the Sumter School District Administration and staff